In the invisible routine of Santa Maria Hospital in Lisbon, Maria Conceição thought her cleaning job was just that, cleaning. Until a simple act of covering an elderly patient with a blanket led her to discover that sometimes angels wear grey uniforms and carry buckets, and that some patients hold secrets bigger than their own illnesses. The hallways of Santa Maria Hospital in Lisbon took on a special quietness after 9 at night. Maria Conceição pushed her cleaning cart through the third-floor corridor, the oncology ward, where the silence was broken only by the occasional beep of machines and whispers from the night staff. At 56 years old, Maria had already completed nearly 2 decades in that same job. She knew every corner, every stubborn stain on the floor, every nurse by name. On that unusually cold winter night for Lisbon standards, the wind battered the windows with uncommon persistence. The hospital's heating worked, but the corridors retained that typical chill of public institutions, efficient enough to keep from freezing, insufficient to be comfortable. Maria stopped in front of room 307. It was her job to clean that area, but she hesitated when she saw the door slightly ajar. She could make out the silhouette of an elderly man, alone, asleep in an uncomfortable position in the armchair beside the bed. The blanket meant to keep him warm had slipped to the floor. "Mr. Ferreira again," she murmured to herself, recognizing the patient from previous chemotherapy sessions. He always refused help, even when he could barely walk. Dr. Neves, the chief oncologist, often seemed exasperated with the stubbornness of his most difficult patient, who was also one of the most critical. Maria entered quietly. It wasn't her role to interact with patients like this, and the head nurse, Helena Rodriguez, had already reprimanded her before for overstepping her duties. Helena was efficient, disciplined, and inflexible. For her, every employee should stick strictly to their assigned role. Against the rules, Maria picked up the blanket from the floor and gently draped it over the sleeping man. As she covered him, he opened his eyes. Deep blue eyes, unusually clear for a Portuguese man of his age. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice like sand on paper. "Ma'am?" "Maria." "Just Maria," she replied, quickly gathering her cleaning supplies, afraid of being seen. "Antonio Ferreira," he responded, extending a trembling hand. It bore old scars on the fingers, marks of decades of manual labor. Before she could reply, Maria heard firm footsteps in the corridor, the unmistakable stride of the head nurse. She quickly grabbed her broom and pretended to clean the floor. "What's going on here?" Helena questioned, her voice as sharp as the wind outside. Her gaze shifted between Maria and the elderly man. "The lady was just cleaning," Antonio answered before Maria could explain. His voice, though weak, carried an unexpected authority. Helena gave a suspicious look but nodded briefly. "Well, finish up. This ward should have been cleaned 15 minutes ago." When the nurse left, Antonio smiled at Maria with a conspiratorial expression that contrasted with his weary face. "Thanks for the blanket. Sometimes the cold in here is worse than the disease." Maria just smiled, unsure how to respond. There was something in the man's dignity that moved her. Before leaving, she noticed an old photo on the table beside him. A young man dressed elegantly next to a beautiful woman, both standing in front of what looked like a fancy restaurant. Maria Conceição knew well the weight of invisibility. Born in the small village of Mertola in Alentejo, she had migrated to Lisbon as a young woman, carrying only a suitcase of clothes and the rural accent she worked so hard to soften. Widowed for 12 years, she had raised 2 sons alone who now lived their own lives, one in France, the other in Porto. The loneliness in her small apartment in Benfica was only eased by Sunday video calls with her grandchildren. In the following nights, without meaning to, Maria began adjusting her cleaning route to pass by room 307 when she knew Antonio would be alone. She learned that he had been one of Portugal's most renowned chefs in the 1970s and 80s, the owner of the restaurant Sabores do Tejo, which appeared in that photograph. The establishment had been frequented by artists, politicians, and even the Spanish royal family when they visited Lisbon. "After April 25th, when everything changed, my restaurant became a meeting point for intellectuals," he explained one night when Maria found time for a brief conversation. "We had a country to rebuild, ideas to exchange. Food always brings people together, you know?" Maria listened, fascinated. Her hands, calloused from domestic work and hospital cleaning, contrasted with Antonio's, equally marked but by the craft of cooking. He spoke passionately about traditional dishes he had reinvented, about how he incorporated elements from the cuisines of Portugal's former colonies long before fusion became trendy. "And the lady in the photo?" Maria asked once, pointing to the elegant woman. Antonio's face tightened with a mix of pain and longing. "Leonor, my wife for 42 years. She passed 3 years ago. On her third visit, Maria met Luisa, Antonio's daughter, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and nervous gestures, who worked as a university professor. She seemed constantly anxious, torn between her demanding job and caring for her father. "He's stubborn as an Alentejo mule," Luisa vented one afternoon, running into Maria in the hallway. "He refuses to go home, insists on sitting in that armchair even when he could be in bed." "Some find comfort in their own stubbornness," Maria replied, thinking of her late husband who had also refused help until the end. One figure who intrigued Maria was Dr. Ricardo Neves. The oncologist, in his early 40s, seemed to have a peculiar relationship with Antonio. He treated him with a respect that went beyond the usual doctor-patient dynamic. One night, Maria caught him sitting with Antonio, not discussing treatments, but listening intently as the elderly man described in meticulous detail the preparation of a traditional seafood rice. "My grandfather was from the Algarve too," the doctor explained when he noticed Maria at the door. "Mr. Ferreira is teaching me secrets that even cookbooks don't know." Antonio smiled, a rare expression on his disease-worn face. "Some recipes aren't written, Dr. Ricardo. They're passed from soul to soul." It was that same night that Maria realized how relentlessly the disease was progressing. Antonio could no longer maintain the upright posture that so defined him. His hands, once steady as he gestured about his culinary creations, now trembled visibly. As she left the room, Maria ran into Helena, the head nurse, reviewing charts at the nursing station. Surprisingly, there was no reproach in her gaze this time. "He doesn't have much time," Helena commented softly, breaking her usual distant professionalism. "And it seems you've become one of the few people he really talks to." Maria's hospital routine began to revolve around those brief moments with Antonio. She started bringing small tokens, a flower picked from the park, a traditional sweet from her hometown, a gastronomy magazine. At first discreet, her gestures soon caught the attention of the hospital staff. On a cold February night, Dr. Neves pulled Maria aside. "Ms. Maria, I need to talk to you about Mr. Ferreira." His deep voice carried concern. "We're entering a more delicate phase of his treatment." Maria felt her heart tighten. "He's getting worse, isn't he?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, but there's more. Antonio has refused the new treatment protocol we proposed. He says he sees no point in delaying the inevitable. But surely there's something that can be done." Maria's voice came out louder than she intended, drawing curious glances from the reception. "Technically, yes, but..." The doctor hesitated. "It's his decision, and as his doctor, I have to respect it." The next day, Maria found Luisa in tears in the waiting room. Antonio's daughter looked devastated, clutching papers Maria recognized as medical documents. "He's giving up," Luisa murmured when Maria approached. "And now he wants to go home. He says he'd rather spend his final days in his apartment, looking at the Tagus." Maria felt a pang of guilt. She had mentioned to Antonio how she missed seeing the river from her old neighborhood before moving to the more affordable Benfica area. "The problem is I can't care for him full-time," Luisa continued. "I have my classes. My students depend on me. But I can't just abandon him either." It was at that moment Maria made a decision that would change everything. "I can help," she offered, surprising herself. "I have days off on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I can rearrange my shifts to have a few free hours on other days." Luisa stared at her, stunned. "You barely know my father." "I know enough," Maria replied, with a firmness she didn't truly feel. The plan, though improvised, began to take shape. Antonio would be discharged and return to his apartment in Alfama, Lisbon's historic district. Maria would assist with his care, filling in when Luisa couldn't be there, and supplementing what home nursing visits didn't cover. Helena, the head nurse, found out about the arrangement and called Maria into her office. "Do you understand what you're doing?" she questioned, her stern tone masking what seemed like genuine concern. "This isn't just cleaning a room and moving on to the next. You'll watch a man waste away day by day." "I've already seen my husband go the same way," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "No one should go through that alone." Helena sighed, and for the first time, Maria saw the nurse's professional rigidity give way to something more human. "Antonio Ferreira isn't just any man," Helena said finally. "He was my teacher, you know? Not of cooking, but of life. When my son was hospitalized here 15 years ago with severe pneumonia, Antonio came every day. He brought little dishes he cooked at home, especially to make my son smile and regain his lost appetite." The revelation left Maria speechless. Suddenly, Helena's strictness about Maria's visits made sense. It wasn't just about hospital rules, but about protecting someone important. As preparations for Antonio's discharge progressed, an unexpected complication arose. Dr. Neves found Maria in the hallway, his usually calm expression now heavy with concern. "Antonio has one last wish before going home," he explained. "He wants to cook one more time in a professional kitchen. He says he needs to prepare something important, a final creation." "But how?" Maria asked, confused. "He can barely stand for more than a few minutes." "That's exactly why I'm talking to you," the doctor replied. "He refuses to tell me what he plans to cook or for whom. He only mentions a decades-old commitment he needs to fulfill. I'm worried he'll push himself too hard and worsen his condition." Maria promised to try to find out, but when she confronted Antonio, he just smiled mysteriously. "Some secrets only reveal themselves at the right time, Maria," he said, looking out the hospital window at the city stretching toward the river. "Just like some flavors only come through at the exact moment of cooking." Antonio's apartment in Alfama was a time capsule. Yellowed photographs of 1970s and 80s celebrities adorned the walls, all taken at his restaurant. Framed awards and newspaper clippings told the story of a man who had revolutionized Portuguese gastronomy. Maria began splitting her time between the hospital and caring for Antonio. During the first few weeks, he showed a renewed energy, as if returning home had awakened some dormant life force. He spent hours leafing through old handwritten recipe notebooks, making notes in the margins with a trembling but determined hand. It was on a rainy Tuesday that everything changed. Maria arrived to find Antonio visibly agitated, sitting at the living room table, surrounded by papers. "Today's the day," he announced, his eyes shining with feverish intensity. "I need you to help me get to the old address of my restaurant." Maria hesitated. "Antonio, the doctor was clear about not overexerting yourself." "I don't care what the doctor said," he interrupted, trying to stand on his own and nearly falling. "Today marks exactly 45 years. I have to go." Confused, Maria helped him sit back down. That's when she noticed among the papers an old newspaper clipping with a dramatic headline, "Fire Destroys Famed Sabores do Tejo Restaurant. 2 Fatalities." "What is this, Antonio?" she asked, carefully picking up the clipping. Antonio closed his eyes as if gathering strength. 45 years ago, my restaurant caught fire during a special dinner. It was Leonore's birthday. I was in the kitchen preparing the main course when it all started." His voice broke. 2 young men died trying to help evacuate the place. One was the son of the Prime Minister at the time. The other... He paused, swallowing hard. "The other was Ricardo's brother." "Ricardo? Dr. Neves?" Maria let slip, stunned. Antonio nodded slowly. "That's why he treats me with such deference, and why I feel so guilty. I'm taking care of the health of the man whose brother died trying to save my customers." The revelation left Maria reeling. Suddenly, so much made sense. The respectful but tense relationship between doctor and patient, the conversations about cooking that seemed to carry an inexplicable weight. "The fire started because of me," Antonio continued, tears now streaming freely. "A lapse in judgment, accumulated exhaustion. I've never forgiven myself." Maria sat beside him holding his hands. "But it was an accident, Antonio. An accident that killed 2 people and destroyed lives," he retorted, "including mine. I could never open another restaurant. The guilt consumed me from within as much as this cancer does now." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Luisa, visibly shaken. "Dr. Neves is on his way there. He says he needs to talk to Dad urgently." "I'm coming too." When she hung up, Antonio seemed strangely calm. "Help me get to the kitchen, Maria. I need to prepare something before they arrive." Against her better judgment, Maria led him to the small kitchen. With trembling but determined hands, Antonio began gathering ingredients: saffron, bomba rice, fish stock he had frozen weeks earlier. "I'm going to make the dish I was preparing that night," he explained as he struggled to light the stove. "It was a special paella, created for Leonor. I never finished it." Maria tried to dissuade him, worried about his condition, but there was a determination in Antonio that made her back off. She watched him work, moving with the grace of decades of experience, even though every motion was now painful. The doorbell rang as the aroma began to fill the apartment. It was Dr. Neves accompanied by Louisa. Both looked agitated. "We found something in your tests," the doctor began, but he stopped abruptly as the smell from the kitchen hit him. His face paled. "It's Valencian paella," Antonio called from the kitchen, his voice carrying a strength Maria hadn't heard in weeks. "With my special touch, the dish I was preparing when your brother died, Ricardo." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Neves stood motionless in the kitchen doorway, his gaze fixed on Antonio's frail figure, who still carried the dignity of a chef at his stove. The aroma filling the apartment was intense: saffron, seafood, aromatic herbs, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere for the confrontation unfolding. 45 years, the doctor finally said, his voice controlled but tense. "I was only 8 years old when Manuel died in that fire." Antonio nodded, slowly stirring the rice in the pan. "And I lost everything that night. Not just the restaurant, but my soul as a chef." Louisa looked from one to the other, confused. "Dad, you never told me. You never said you knew Dr. Neves' family." "There are wounds we never mentioned, daughter," Antonio replied softly, "for fear that naming them will make them bleed again." Maria felt she should leave, let them have their moment alone, but something kept her rooted there, a silent witness to a moment that transcended the present. "Why now?" Dr. Neves asked, taking a hesitant step toward the kitchen. "After all these months under my care, why reveal this now?" Antonio turned off the stove with a trembling hand. "Because I'm dying, Ricardo, and before I go, I needed to finish what was interrupted that night." With visible effort, Antonio began serving the paella onto plates Maria recognized as antique porcelain, possibly relics from the old restaurant. The aroma was mesmerizing, evoking a sunlit Spain that starkly contrasted with the Lisbon rain now lashing the windows. "This dish, it was the last thing Manuel saw being prepared," Antonio continued, his voice breaking with emotion and physical weakness. "He came into the kitchen to warn me about the fire starting in the storage area. He could have run straight outside, but he didn't. He went back to help the others." Dr. Neves ran a hand over his face, a futile attempt to hide the tears beginning to form. "He was always like that. He put others first." "Like you, son," Antonio said, surprising everyone with the affectionate term. "You agreed to care for the man responsible for your brother's death. That takes a greatness few possess." Louisa sobbed quietly in a corner, while Maria remained frozen, witnessing the unfolding of a story that far surpassed anything she had imagined. "It wasn't your fault," Dr. Neves said finally, stepping forward to help Antonio sit. "I spent years investigating that fire, searching for answers. It was a short circuit in the old electrical system, not your negligence." Antonio looked at him incredulous. "How can you know?" "The reports were archived, but not for me. I'm a doctor. I have access." Dr. Neves gave a sad smile. "And I'm also the brother of someone who died saving others. I needed to understand." With careful gestures, he helped Antonio bring the plates to the table. "When I recognized you as my patient, I decided the best tribute to Manuel's memory would be to care for you with the same dedication he showed that night." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. The four sat at the table facing the paella that exuded aromas of sea and memory. "This is more than food," Antonio said, looking at the dish before him. "It's redemption." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Dr. Neves pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Your test showed something extraordinary," he said, carefully opening the envelope. "The experimental treatment you abandoned, it seems to have had residual effects. The tumor is shrinking, Antonio." The news hit like a bolt of lightning. Louisa let out a muffled cry of surprise. "Impossible," Antonio murmured. "The symptoms got worse." The symptoms did, due to accumulated side effects. But the cancer itself, the doctor spread the test images across the table. "It's responding. It's not a cure, understand that. But we could be talking about months, maybe a year more." Antonio looked at the medical images, then at the paella, and finally at Maria, whose eyes were brimming with tears. "Maybe," he said slowly, "some recipes really do take a lifetime to complete." 3 months had passed since that rainy night. Spring had arrived in Lisbon, bringing light and color to the steep streets of Alfama. Maria continued splitting her time between her hospital job and visits to Antonio, who surprisingly gained strength with each passing week. The apparent medical miracle had given Antonio not just time but purpose. With Luisa's help and Dr. Neves's close monitoring, he started a small project, documenting all his recipes in a handwritten book, illustrated with old photographs from the restaurant and stories behind each dish. "It's not just a cookbook," he explained to Maria one sunny afternoon as she helped him organize photos. "It's a reconciliation with my past." The relationship between Antonio and Dr. Neves had evolved into something that transcended the doctor-patient bond. The doctor often showed up outside office hours, bringing rare ingredients Antonio mentioned wanting. In return, the chef shared stories about Manuel that the doctor had never heard. Maria watched it all with a mix of joy and melancholy. She felt like a vital part of this unexpected journey, but she also knew her role was diminishing as Antonio improved. He no longer needed her care as much, and she had returned to her full hospital routine. It was on an ordinary Monday that Helena, the head nurse, called Maria into her office. Her expression was serious. "Mr. Ferreira was here today for tests," she said, flipping through a file. "He asked me to give you this when you got to work." It was a simple envelope with Maria's name written in Antonio's elegant but trembling handwriting. Inside was a letter and another, smaller, sealed envelope. "Can I?" Maria asked, gesturing to see if she could open it there. Helena nodded, a glint of curiosity in her usually reserved eyes. "Dear Maria," the letter began, "when you covered me with that blanket on a cold night, you didn't realize you were also covering a man whose soul had been frozen for decades. Your simple act of humanity was the first true warmth I felt since the fire that took my restaurant and 2 precious lives. Dr. Neves tells me I still have a few months, maybe more. I don't know if it's true or just medical hope, but I've decided to live each day as if it were granted by a miracle. The smaller envelope contains something I want you to have. It's the deed to a small house in Sintra that belonged to my family. It's been abandoned for years, but with some work it could become a home again. Luisa agreed that you deserve it more than anyone. This isn't gratitude, Maria. It's recognition. You taught me that sometimes angels don't come with shining wings, but with brooms, buckets, and enormous hearts. With affection, Antonio Ferreira." Tears streamed freely down Maria's face as she finished reading. Helena, completely abandoning her usual professional composure, hugged her. "Some people clean dirt," the head nurse said softly. "Others clean souls. You do both." That night, as she finished her shift, Maria found Luisa, Antonio, and Dr. Neves waiting for her at the hospital reception. Together, they formed an unlikely but harmonious picture, like distinct ingredients that, in the hands of a great chef, become something extraordinary. "Shall we have dinner?" Antonio invited, stronger than Maria had seen him in months. "I have a new recipe to test, and I need the opinion of my savior." 2 years later, in a restored little house in Sintra, Maria regularly hosts visitors for Sunday lunches. Antonio, still battling his illness but surprisingly resilient, oversees the kitchen from a special chair, while Dr. Neves and Luisa help serve. On the wall, framed, is the first page of the published recipe book, Flavors of Redemption, the cuisine that survived the fire. What if the greatest power in the world were hidden in your hands at this very moment? A simple blanket draped, a kind word whispered, a look that truly sees the invisible. As Maria discovered, we don't need superhero capes to transform lives, just the courage to reach out when everyone else moves on. Today, as you leave here, I challenge you. Find your Antonio, that person on the margins, forgotten in the shadows of routine. And then do something small that for them could mean everything. Who knows what heartfelt letter the universe is preparing for you?